You're listening to Forward Faster, bite-sized insights for entrepreneurs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Simon, and I'm the Operations Director for Luminate. We are the world's largest optics, photonics, and imaging accelerator. And today we're very happy to have with us Keenan Pinto, who is the CEO and co-founder of Nordetect, which is part of cohort 3 in Luminate, and they're based in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm going to let Keenan tell you what they do. So without further ado, Keenan, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Andy. At Nordetect, what we do is we build chemical analysis systems for agricultural and environmental testing. We see ourselves as a sustainability company that help farmers and agronomists on the ground level, but also enterprises figure out their chemical footprint related to agriculture.
So I know what you do. I know how you guys got involved in it. Obviously, we've had lots of interaction being in the cohort. What led you to this problem in a sense? I mean, you're not a farmer, I don't think, I remember your background. How did you get involved, and what is in agriculture that drove you to this?
So it's kind of a combination of a bit of our academic background. Both my co-founder, Palak, and I, we studied plant genetic modification together back in 2012-13. And we're both originally from India. And one of the things that we heard a lot growing up, and even today, is that Indian farmers commit suicide because of the humongous debt they take on from loan sharks. And all of this debt is mainly to buy inputs to grow crops. So the inputs being seeds, fertilizer, and the water is free for them. So seeds, fertilizer, any sprays they put on. And most times, almost always, they don't know how much they need to add. And that ends up with a whole bunch of environmental issues where you have too much fertilizer adding too much salt to the soil. And we knew this was an issue. What really led us to believe that our path to developing this product would be well received was that the Indian government at the time developed a program called the Soil Health Card. We had some visits to China where we saw that the Chinese government was putting a big emphasis on soil health. And in Europe, we actually have a kind of guideline, or in Denmark specifically, a law around how much fertilizer can be applied to fields. So all of these kind of data points triangulated down to one thing, that we need to figure out how to optimize the use of chemistry on farm. And the target we picked was fertilizer, or its constituents, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, primarily because in our analysis of a farm's economy, machinery is the highest cost, second to renting the land if they rent the land, and the cost behind that was fertilizer. And we weren't robotics engineers, and we were biochemists. We picked fertilizer as the target to attack with our product.
So if I had to distill that down to a non-technical person or somebody who doesn't know much about agriculture or farming, what you're doing is you're actually taking a lab, which normally a farmer will send soil samples out to a lab, have to wait, comes back, and then they can make decisions on crops and fertilizer. What you're doing is you're bringing a lab to the field and having basically an instant feedback as to what's going on in the soil, so they know how to plant with their fertilizer and address any issues.
Precisely. And what's interesting about that is the technology, the domain of technology that we've adopted to use this is funnily enough called lab on a chip. And that's because the principles of this technology base is that you are performing experiments or performing things or experiments that would be done in a lab, except you're automating it on a tiny cartridge. The easiest way to break this down is if you know anyone who has diabetes or some kind of illness and they need to take a finger prick blood test every day. This is a very common practice for diabetes patients. It's very similar to our product. We have a chip and a cartridge and a reader system similar to the diabetes test, except we measure the fertility of the earth rather than the health of a human being.
So it's interesting that you mentioned those other markets. Obviously, agriculture is your beachhead. That's where you're going for your experience. Do you see Nordetect or yourselves going into something like the diabetic market and or other health or analysis fields?
It's always been a big question mark, specifically because Palak, my co-founder, after the academics background in plant sciences further diversified into medtech. So leveraging her background in molecular biology to build polymers, membranes that could be suited for medtech. And we actually have a client right now who's in the medtech domain that buys sensors from us. But with our strategy, or at least with our vision, we see that there's enough problems here in the industrial, agricultural, environmental, and other industries like marine that we can solve. So maybe medtech's out of scope for us today, but the thought has definitely crossed our minds.
Interesting. So you're talking about cross industries, although obviously focused on agriculture. We're also talking about cross countries, for lack of a better term, because obviously you're based in Denmark. You now coming to the U.S. What do you see in terms of the differences and how they approach agriculture, or are they similar? So this is a universal problem for all farmers.
So one of the things that we've noticed, there are many similarities, but a lot of differences. And that's a vague answer, but it's true in the sense that if you consider Denmark and Rochester are fairly close at a latitude away from each other. So you're looking at similar climatic types, and so you have similar crops that are grown in some cases. What we've seen that is similar is that it's very industrialized. So you see farms and farmers that have a certain knowledge. If they're not using advanced technology, they're doing automated bookkeeping using a software. They are looking at using some kind of farm management system. So this is, while it may not be every farmer, I'd say at least 50 to 60% of the farmers are digitally maintaining their records. So that's a big similarity we've seen. They're tech savvy. They're looking for new solutions, not always for the same reasons, but they are looking for new technological solutions. So that's another similarity that has given us strong hope for the US. Where they differ is based on the on-the-ground agronomic practices. So let's take in Denmark, because of the way the legal system around agriculture has worked, they've built a system of having an advisory service or an extension service similar to the US, but that extension service, for example, cannot recommend what fertilizer company to use or what testing service to use because it's government backed. In the US, for example, you do have a lot of extension services, but you have a lot of private contractors who service farms, and they don't have that issue. So they can do a full service turnkey process for the farmer where they come and do the testing, either by sending it to the lab or using our product, and then they can go in and supply them with the right kind of fertilizer. So that's some interesting differences, but that is precisely the reason why the US is very attractive.
Well, great. So that actually, let's shift gears a little bit now, and let's go over to what about Luminate drew you here, because you're part of cohort 3. I'd love to get your feedback. What have you gained so far by being in Luminate? I mean, right now we're in COVID, and it's a little bit of an extended situation in terms of how we were running the program. We're all sort of on our feet making changes, and it's going well. But love to hear from you. What have you gained by being in the program so far?
When we first applied to Luminate and we were looking at Rochester in general, we were really drawn to the whole fact that the level of expertise in a very specific domain all exists in maybe a very small area with a few towns in Monroe County. That's what drew us there. But then over the course of time, what we realized through Luminate was that we've done accelerators before. And so we always have a benchmark. And what Luminate has really helped us figure out is look at the business from different perspectives. A lot of coaching that you receive from accelerator programs focus on, hey, you need to make a product, you need to sell this product, and they usually cater to software companies. So making the product, a statement like just build the product, if you say that to a Luminate company, they're going to be like, listen, what are you talking about, right? Which part? Because that is a slightly different business. So Luminate has helped us understand different business models. Say you don't have your product ready today. Well, of course, you can do a lot. You still have highly skilled personnel that you employ on your staff budget. So can you maybe have a couple of them that are doing some contract work for corporate? Looking at where you sit in the value chain. We've done value chain mapping before, but we've never really looked at the value chain of our product, which includes our suppliers, their suppliers, and further on, who could we resell this to that could be partners to us. So one of the things that was a very specific example was that most investors and most accelerators say, well, you're doing this project with this corporate, it's a distraction from your mainline business. But Luminate, and specifically coaching from Sujata and Dawn, one of our mentors, really helped us figure out that this is not a distraction if it fits within your strategic plan or your vision for what you want to build as a company. And then that was backed up further on by investors who Luminate introduced us to, who in separate conversations said to us, hey, well, is this something you would do in the next 5 years of your business with your own budget? And we said, no. And then they said, well, that's interesting because this is now a new revenue generating opportunity for the company. And we would probably never have done that if we didn't get advice from Luminate. That was one of the very precise examples.
In terms of being in this cohort and being part of Luminate, what advice would you give to companies that that might be watching this or listening to this right now and thinking, hey, maybe Luminate's right for me, but I'm not sure or whatnot? They'll always have questions. What advice would you give to a team that's applying to Luminate?
Well, the one thing is, if you're a company that does anything related to optics, photonics, or imaging, or industries, or you use this in your product in some way, we're not a photonics company, but we use elements of this. Apply. You will definitely not lose anything by applying, but you stand a lot to gain. The one thing that's interesting about Luminate is they give you feedback, which is appreciated always, and it's honest feedback, not the we've heard some interesting feedback. Yes. But the second thing is that if you do get in, you actually get to go to Rochester, and we were really happy to make that first visit because I'd never been there before. I'd heard stories, but I'd never been there before, and it's a very interesting experience. You meet some amazing people on the days, so you're not missing out by not applying. So my advice is definitely apply and take it seriously. So there's an application form. It's a standard application form like any other accelerator. Take it seriously and make a good video. If you spend time in the video, it's the only way you can communicate one-to-one to the person reading it. I'd say invest time in the video. No funny effects, just you pitching. It goes a long way.
Yeah, I would, as the person who does all the recruiting, if you are applying, I can tell you right now, you do a video, it can be handheld on your iPhone. It doesn't matter about production quality. We're not looking for directors and producers here. Just really being able to sit there and tell them your company in your words is the most effective thing. And also tells us, hey, can you tell your company in your own words? Because you'd be surprised how many founders aren't able to do that, which is such a key piece and component. So
there's one more point that I would, if you make it to selection days, don't skip on the technical prowess of your product and your team, because that's most business presentations, you kind of have a couple of slides about the technology. The people at Luminate and the judges will really understand what you're saying. So don't feel afraid don't dumb it down just because you think that people aren't going to get it. They will get it and they will be interested. And if you don't do it, you might actually lose points. So that's something to consider when you get to selection days.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. One of our selling points or positive points when we talk about Luminate is our board of advisors who we are very active with and are active with companies, and they're all CEOs of top, optics and photonics companies or universities. So how would you describe the value that they've brought to Nordetect, and how, I guess just that, how would you describe the value they bring to Nordetect?
So we've been extremely lucky that members of the board of Luminate have been allocated to us as mentors in our mentor team. And it's really hard to phrase what the value is, because you get someone that's been through this before. There is no quantification of that kind of value. You get advice on, of course, the technical aspects of, okay, how do you go through from where you are today in production to the next stage of production? You also get the advice on commercial. So when we were figuring out how do we approach the situation with the enterprise partner, what should the pricing be like? Is this a distraction or is it not? Having this sounding board or mentor team that Luminate gave us has been extremely helpful in not making the decisions for us, but guiding us along some of the variables that we should consider before we make these decisions. And when members of this board are top tier CEOs who've exited, made a lot of money off their companies, which is the dream of young companies like us, you get to see some of the moves that they've made, some strategic choices, and that's you can't put a number or a value on that. I mean, just a single conversation from one of these mentors or Luminate's board members, that can set you on, they open your mind, basically. They open your mind through expertise that you cannot acquire by Google. And that's, I think that's the best way to put it. You cannot find this expertise on Google.
We're going to TM that and start using that with our line. So there we go. I think on that note, let's go to one final question and, really get your input on bioanalysis, where, we know where it stands today. Where do you see it in, 10 years from now? And how do you see Nordetect a part of that?
Well, it's an interesting question when you consider instruments are getting smaller, they're getting easier to make, they're getting more scalable. One of the things we've observed with the industry is that medical moves faster than agriculture and allied industries because of the strong need for human health and preservation. So a good way to look at it is if you put them all in the same box, we're seeing instruments get smaller, cheaper. So companies that would make millions of dollars off a big dense desktop instrument that needed a technician to operate and was really high maintenance is now being fit into something that fits in your palm. So I equate it in a loose way to how the computer industry went from mainframes to laptops. We're seeing that happen with giant desktop size instruments that are now being squished into tiny portable instruments. We have seen that with some of the teams that are in Luminate right now. They're working on projects like this, us included. And through the network that Luminate has introduced us to, we've seen companies doing portable nuclear magnetic resonance, portable, buzzwords, but very high-end instruments being scaled down in an interesting manner. But the one thing that's really standing out is that everyone is learning the value of data. And so all of these instruments have a connectivity element. And I think that's what's going to give them the advantage over the last generation of instruments. And that's where the industry is heading. It's not only being able to do the test or provide the quantification, it's about using the data gathered in some form of machine learning application to help guide the user on how to improve. I think that's the combination of portable analytics with management and usage of this data, big data. That's what's really going to take the industry to its new heights.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I want to let people to know where they can find you online. It's nordetect.com. It's NORDETECT.com. And again, want to thank Keenan Pinto, who's the CEO and co-founder. Really appreciate you taking the time today. And for all the people who are listening, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen or watch us. If you're interested in more podcasts that we do on Forward Faster, you can go to nextcorp.org/podcast. That's nextcorps.org/podcast. Or you can go to search us on Spotify or iTunes on Next for Forward Faster. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.